Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Viola Pierce. I am the CEO and the founder of the Nurse Nurturer and VP Nursing, where our goal is to equip healthcare providers to be spiritually and physically fit, financially stable, able to lead with integrity, to decrease error at the bedside, but not only that, to lead a full empowered life. Melissa and I actually are putting on a conference this coming up August 7th. It's going to be Brilliant and Balanced Healthcare Professionals Tapping into Your Greatness. It's going to give you 6.5 contact hours, and we are going to have an amazing time. It's going to be on a virtual platform. You can join from your own home, and we will have such a good time. So I cannot wait to see you there. So I just want to introduce Melissa. Melissa is the owner of medicaltraining.me, which is remind me, it's a certification company.
It is a medical continuing education company. So we do all the ABC certifications and some customized education as well as leadership.
And so so Melissa and I first met when I was working, and she was teaching ACLS class. And I remember when she first started teaching that class, I was like I had taken ACLS for years, and I did fine on the test, but I questioned whether I was going to do fine on the test. And when she taught it that day, I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to do good on this test, because I kind of remembered the questions, because I saw how she was teaching it, and it was amazing. And I was like, okay. I was like, this is amazing. And so literally I went in that test. I missed one question. She was so enthusiastic. She was so good at teaching. She made it interesting. And I was like, I have got to know her. I have got to know who she is. And so I went up to the front of the room. I got a card, and the rest is history. We have been friends ever since. I absolutely love her. We collaborate, and we just have an amazing time with each other. So thank you, Melissa, for coming on today, because we're going to talk about leadership in healthcare. Which can sometimes be tough, and especially as it relates to the pandemic, and as it relates to being empathetic to what's going on. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask is, doing every interaction with another person, what are you seeing in the person that you are connecting with? Like, kind of, what are the things that you connect with in other people?
I think it's really important, whether we're talking about functioning in the pandemic in the healthcare setting, or even in our everyday interactions as healthcare professionals, going into other business sectors, for example, the bank. We need to think about the fact that right now, everyone is in some version of crisis. And so it makes us stop and think about our communication, and think about some of the principles that we think about in healthcare about when people are in crisis, how they receive information, right? I can remember from the years of ER and ICU, I remember so many times telling family members, I'm giving you a lot of information, and you're going to remember about 20% of this. And that means it's okay to ask questions again. And it means that it's okay if you're not retaining everything I'm sharing with you, because you've got to understand it is a natural part of the process when you're overwhelmed that you don't hear like you should, and you also don't behave like you should, right? Crisis a lot of times is bringing out the worst in people. I'm an optimist. So I'm like, it's bringing out the best in some, and it is. But I think there is less tolerance and less patience. And so that's something that I'd love for us to think about this morning, is how can we be more mindful of that, and what are some things we can do to consciously recognize how we're communicating information, whether it's at the bedside or it's in any other sector, even in our own homes, right? When we get comfortable at home, don't we just, the filter falls off and it all flies out,
Right.
My daughter this week said, Mommy, she says, you know why I get stressed? Is because you come in and get stressed. And I'm like, because my house is a mess. I was like, all you had to do today was not make a mess. So again, I noticed that my filter has fallen off more. And again, I got to recognize again, how can I communicate better? Because nothing is normal for any of us right now.
Right. And it is really tough because of the fact, and I guess it used to be, and I really know that I personally have grown because it used to be when people didn't agree with what I said, then I was really, I was like, are they crazy? What's
Mhm.
going on? Like, I was like, what is going on? And now I'm just empathetic to it. And I'm just like, because I want to hear it. You need to seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And
Exactly.
so, whether sometimes you can walk away from the table and you can not agree on everything, right? But you still want to be respectful and you still want to be kind to the other person, regardless of how that goes. Because at the end of the day, like you said, we're all in crisis. And, and understanding that, and when, as it relates to my children, I mean, I would come home stressed and I would be hollering all over the house too, and I had to learn that that's just not necessarily the best way to handle things. But it took me a long time to get there, right? And of course, my
Right.
children, we're empty nesters, and so it's good for me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is good for me now.
And what you bring up is a great fact is there was a great handout that I got from a network on aging meeting. So you never know where your resources are going to come from. And that's the beauty of listening to other people is, that there are always people that are smarter than you out there and are looking at life from a different angle. And there is nothing wrong with taking in their perspective. You don't have to accept their perspective, but like you said, acknowledge it. So it talks about in this handout about effectively showing authentic empathy and communicating is number one. It says recognize what are you seeing in the person you're connecting with, and I really like that. Right, instead of immediately getting defensive, putting those fists up, you're ready, and a lot of times also in healthcare. We're quick to respond and quick to think because that's the way we've been trained, right? So when
Right.
we've been trained to do this, sometimes we're formulating our own response before we finish listening. And I know that is something that I intently work on because I am bad for that. Is I want to, oh yeah, the next thing I'm gonna say is, well, that means I'm not fully hearing what you're saying. And so sometimes, and especially, our body language is communicating 80% of what we're saying. So we need to be mindful that we stay open, but also try to hear what they're saying, because if their body language is saying they're stressed, we need to really interpret what they're doing. Sorry, I've got a cat over here making noises. You see a flying cat, fur is flying. It's too early in the morning for that. Devil cat. So anyway, what are you hearing with the person you're connecting with? Are you hearing when you respond with them? What is their reaction? Because we're in crisis, also sometimes their reaction may not match up with what we expected, and so I think it's important to take a moment to think about that. And if you're not, it's always important to reflect back. And like in healthcare, not do you understand what I just said, but okay, now I've given you a lot of information. Tell me what you understood about this, because that gives them an opportunity to reflect back. And then if you didn't connect, you can reinforce those points. And a lot of times that helps us avoid some really awkward, frustrating times. And yesterday I was in a meeting, and what they were saying, I heard words, and I don't know why I could not. I said, I'm sorry, I don't think I heard what you said. So let me repeat this again. And I think we went through it 4 times, and I was like, they're going to think I'm challenged. But, the truth is for whatever reason, it, it just wasn't connecting. And so, I've gotten to a place where I've learned to ask more questions, but culturally, a lot of times, especially in healthcare, we have to remember that, people think that asking questions shows disrespect to the provider and lack of confidence. And so we have to remind the patient. I had a family interaction that I had a great aunt in the hospital, and she was sick, and the family listened to the doctors and nurses and nodded their heads and thanked them. And then I would come in the afternoon and say, how are things going? I just want to check in. And they're like, well, we have a few questions. And I'm like, okay. And as I listened to the questions, I said, why didn't you ask your nurse these questions? Well, she's really nice. And it's not that we didn't feel confident in what she was doing. I said, I think you've misunderstood. Like we assume that you understand everything unless you ask questions. And it's not a sign of disrespect. So again, it goes back to recognizing where they're coming from And I was able to re-educate my own family that, you know what, I'm happy to ask these questions, but it's even better if you ask in those moments, because these are the people that are in your chart, right? And they know more about your day to day than what you're sharing with me at the bedside. And it definitely improved the communication and the confidence with the family. And then that discomfort as a nurse leader with me going back and asking questions, because as the nurse leader, it could have been perceived as I was questioning their ability. So as a leader, I also had to go back when you got to be the intermediary in a situation like that. I think you also have to be able to think about your words communicating. Because I went back to the staff and I said, I love my family, but I want you to understand that as I'm asking these questions, it's because they felt like it would be disrespectful to ask you. So it has nothing to do with me judging your ability to do what you're doing. But instead, I'm trying to bridge a gap, and hopefully we won't continue to do this because they do need to ask you directly. But fortunately, God gave me enough sense for a moment to think about how I was going to word that, because again, especially when we're in crisis, right? And sometimes when we're communicating as leaders, um, we we bring across a different tone because we are a leader. So we have to think about again that they're in crisis. You know, we're all dealing with things where we've got to stop and think, what's on the healthcare provider's mind. And right now, some of them are thankful that they've got a job every day. Some of them are praying they're not going to get laid off because the volumes aren't high enough in their units, you know, because we see this surge of need and then we see this drop in need. And it's this really weird place for healthcare, because as a nurse, I never worried about the economy. I
Right.
never worried about job security, because I was like, there are always going to be sick people. And COVID has really changed that for us.
Right.
So as they come to the bedside, there's a piece of them that is grateful that they've got a job. There's a piece of them that's terrified that they're going to bring this back to their family. You
That's
know, am I going to take these germs home? And so there's this whole divide and tear as they're working every single day. And then they're taking on the crisis of the family. So I think it really comes back to giving grace. You know, we have got to swallow and give more grace than we ever thought we would give anybody.
absolutely, absolutely. And being very intentional about listening. Simon Sinek said the eat last,
Yes.
And so it is about listening to what everybody else is saying. And like you said, being very intentional about listening to hear and not listening to respond, right?
Exactly.
Because you want to be able to understand what that person is going through. And again, you're not going to agree on everything, but that's okay. I mean, that's the differences in who you are and who I am. I mean,
Mhm.
even in our own interactions, I mean, we agree on most things, but there are some things that we just don't agree on, right? And
Right.
but we're respectful enough to each other to still be amazing friends, because at the end of the day, God calls us to love. And TD Jakes talked about that whole being love. He said if you could get, you have 10 questions. And one of the question was, how do you what does God want the most for you? And then the answer was for you to love your for you to love the people that you're around, but also for you to love God. And he said if you get that one right, then you would get 90% of the test right. He said that's how it is, because you need to love the people that you're with and not necessarily gauge them on what they have going on. And so it's really important that we as a people understand that it is about our connection, it is about our love, it is about us as individuals coming together and making sure that we do love each other, and that we are going to be different, and that we have to understand that those differences should not divide us. Those differences really should pull us together, because at the end of the day, you have a strength that I don't have. I have a strength that you don't have. And then with those weaknesses, we can work it out so that we can be strong women, strong healthcare providers, strong leaders at the end of the day.
Well, and you're right, because then we're going to take care of each other. And sometimes I think about the fact that when I have someone that I'm still communicating with and I'm collaborating with, despite the fact that we have differences, it makes the relationship even more authentic. You know, because you A wise person never has a bunch of head bobbers in the room going, yeah, that's the greatest idea ever. Yes, you're the best. You're the best. Those aren't people that grow, right? Those are people that kind of get stuck where they are. So I love the fact that when there are challenges, that we know, and that's why biblically it says, love the God love your God with all your heart and love one another. And I think it's because he knew we were going to have differences, right? He knew that we were going to have differences that we were going to have to work through, and that love is the only way through it. And that sounds very cliche, but in a time where there's so many issues that are dividing us, sometimes I dodge social media because it's become such a landmine. That I think at the end of the day, you're exactly right. As you know, first seek to understand before to be understood. I love the prayer of St. Francis. That's been on my refrigerator for 25 years. It's like yellow brown. If you come to my house next time, look in the top left-hand corner. I've had that same prayer printed off for 25 years. Because I agree with you completely. We've got to think about things. I think with this, especially when you're disagreeing, I think it takes an extra moment to take a breath and acknowledge the other person's frustration. I think a lot of times we don't want to deal with the uncomfortable, so we want to very quickly shoo it and put it in a box and make it go away. And sometimes we just need to sit in the moment and take a breath and say, you're right, this sucks. And
Right.
you and I have had those conversations, right? We watch the sunset talking to each other about these conversations. We don't usually watch sunrises because, my butt ain't getting out of bed this early, except for love of you. But those moments where we have to take a breath and just recognize that as we're communicating, especially if it's difficult information, be it to a family member, be it to a colleague, that we acknowledge that as we deliver this information, that what the other person is feeling is very real, whether we agree with it or not. I always talk about crisis is either real or perceived. You work in an ER and everybody that walks in the door thinks that their issue is a crisis.
That's
Now
right.
we triage that crisis and we decide whose crisis is more of a crisis. But to everyone that comes into the emergency department, they're inconvenienced, right? Nobody makes a decision. Well, a few people make decisions to go to the ER, but everybody else, there's some people like, yep, it's time for me to go. We know them, we love them, and we love to hate them, but we love them. I almost went to a funeral recently. I was like, yeah, one of my frequent flyers. But in that situation, we've got to take a minute again to empathize, to understand that there are differences, and to recognize where that person's coming from.
And understanding that there are some people, and this is a conversation that I had yesterday, understanding that some people they don't necessarily have the knowledge base that everybody else does, right? So we're in healthcare, and so we have a certain amount or basic knowledge as it relates to the pandemic.
Right.
And even in healthcare, even that is up in the air because we don't know. So because we have that basic knowledge, understanding that there's stop points that are put into place for people who just don't understand and that don't get it, right? And having that. But yeah, it is
Well, and then we've got to be creative with how we explain. I had someone ask me about the mask situation, which we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but the whole reason I bring it up is when he was talking about it, he's a radio guy. And he was like, why is everybody freaking out about masks? And how do you really feel about this? So as I gave him my perspective on it, he said, my God, I haven't looked at it from any of this perspective. And he's a mask wearer. I mean, he's very legalistic about it. Like we're 10 feet away from each other in an office and he's got on his mask, I've got on mine, and it keeps falling off his face. And I'm like, twist those little sides. And he's like, oh my God. And I'm like, so I had to think of a way to explain it to him differently. So, I gave him the whole thing. We've seen the meme where it says, if two people aren't wearing pants and one of them pees, you're both going to get wet. And so if the person that's going to pee wears pants, they wet themselves and it's less likely it's going to wet you. But if you got on pants too, you're pretty safe. Right. And he was like, oh my God. And I was like, can we put that on the radio? He said he'd think on that. He hadn't gotten back to me. But again, I had to change my communication because you're right. From their perspective, we can't assume, and sometimes we do it out of a false sense of humility. We think that we're going to be humble and assume that everybody knows the things that we know, and that's not fair. That's not fair. I don't think we ever need to talk down to someone. And you've seen that in my class. I try to level the playing field when I have a group in a room because I don't want egos to get in the way. But I also want everybody to take a breath and recognize that even if you have a knowledge base, there is always something you can add to it.
Right.
And I think that comes into our communication as well. Let's just don't assume that everybody understands the things we do, even if it's been repeated 8,000 times, because they're in crisis. So they held 20%.
Yeah, Gary V, he came on and he said that you have to, you have to you have to have those people that are around you that are not necessarily going to tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
You have to have people around you that are not going to be snarky and mean about it, but they're going to come to you and they're going to give you some honest feedback on what you should and should not be doing. And I think that that is important, right? Because you don't want someone who is always a yes man, like you said, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
someone who can honestly give it to you, but you have to have, you have to have that few that works it out um, in that manner. Now, just tell me how you have grown. So, like, as it relates to things that it used to be that you didn't like, and then things that you like, if you hear something that you don't necessarily like, how have you grown from that?
I think you have to really practice your game face. You really have to practice your game face so that whatever you're feeling, you have to be very conscious. We mentioned the fact that 80% of your communication is your body language.
Yeah.
So I have become more intentional about it, especially if I'm getting news I don't want to hear. I try to adjust my body so it's not so obvious, because while that person is talking, we tend to shoulders start rising up and our arms start to cross and we start to get nervous and start ticking. And, I had a leader, she would adjust herself, and we always knew we had, really made her uncomfortable because she started adjusting herself, and we would start joking about it. And actually, that's how I learned some of this, was from those great leaders that said, be aware of what those tails are and those ticks are in that situation. And I think part of it comes with age, is just the fact that you recognize that not everybody has to give you raving reviews, and not everyone has to approve of you, and you don't have to agree with everyone, but you have to be respectful. I tell my children, my daughter had a horrible teacher this year. I mean, it was an awful experience. And I said, Lainey, even if you don't like her, I said, she is someone that you need to respect and treat with respect. I said, because she is your teacher, she is in a position of authority. And so even if you don't like her, at the end of the day, you're still responsible for being respectful. And that was something that I was really trying to drive home to an 11-year-old little girl. You can imagine the challenge of that, because she's as sassy as I am, if not more. She may actually exceed my sassiness. She got it from her mom and her dad. So I'm like, God help us all. She'll be successful either running a prison or a company, but we're not sure which yet. Yeah, but growing is recognizing, it kind of starts to dance on the topic of unconscious bias, which I love the topic of unconscious bias. And maybe we should come back and have a thing about that one morning. But recognizing that we all have certain beliefs. And so there are certain things that someone may do or say, or just certain kinds of people that are going to approach us, that are going to trigger us, that are going to make us go into that place of defense. And so we need to be able to take a breath in that moment and recognize it for what it is, and to decide what we're going to do with it. And so that's my personal work that I keep doing, is saying, okay, how can you practice receiving information better, and not building a wall before, again, seek to understand before being understood. I mean, that was perfect when you led with that this morning.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those things that is it's tough, but when you do understand, because I remember going into patients' rooms, and especially patients with high blood pressure that were not taking their blood pressure medicine.
Right.
When there are certain medications that they give for children with ADHD. And so the patients would come in and then they would say, well, it makes me so tired, I can't do it. And I was like, but you have to find another way in which to do it. But it wasn't until I understood the reason why they
Mhm.
were not taking their medication that I kind of understood, what was going on with that. And so it's been really, really eye-opening to really be that way, and
Right.
just to understand it from another person's standpoint. So yes, it has been interesting for sure.
Well, and that leads down to something else that was on that handout that I was reading. Is it talked about, especially when you're trying to communicate with empathy, and that's a great example. Um, Helping come up with a solutions based, or a problem based solution, or I can't even get my words out this morning. But you know what I'm saying? Is it read it? Okay, so trying to come up with a solutions based problem solve, right? Is that you want to acknowledge that, yes, I understand that this makes you feel bad, and the reason it makes you feel bad is because your blood pressure is trying to come back to a place of normal. So this is going to be temporary, because what we're doing in the long term is that feeling is going to go away as your blood pressure normalizes again. And so trying to, again, acknowledge where they're coming from. You're exactly right. And then talking about, so what are some of the solutions that we can do? Maybe you take this at bedtime, so it's your tired period. I think that as healthcare providers and as leaders, we need to help come up with some realistic solutions that
Right.
acknowledge what they're doing, but not just say, "Oh well, that sucks," and the world's going to hell in a handbasket. That's not the solution. The solution is, how do we have these honest conversations? How do we acknowledge each other and check each other? When we're out of line, I think a good leader always has someone. Again, you talked about, John Maxwell talks about his round table of people that he has, his kitchen table that comes in and holds them accountable. And yeah, I think that's important.
Yes, yes. Well, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. I love you. I have loved you always. I will love you always.
Yeah.
Again, we are hosting the first annual Global Summit. It is Brilliant and Balanced Healthcare Professionals tapping into your greatness. It will provide you 6.5 contact hours. It will be August 7th from 7:30 until 5:30. I cannot wait to see you in the room. It's going to be an amazing event. Some people think that because it's on a virtual platform that it won't be good. No, no, no. It's going to be amazing. You're going to be like, oh my God, that's the way we should do it from now on.
Yeah, since we're doing the nurse contact hours, I can tell the group right now that I've got the inside look, because I'm looking at what these speakers are going to talk on, and I am so excited. I'm so excited to hear the information, and actually the fact that it's going to be virtual like this. We're giving you our best, right? We're giving you our best. There are no glitches, and we're giving you our best, and you get to sit in an audience however you like to. So I encourage you to sign up, because I know this is going to be amazing. We've been planning this for over a year. Viola's been dreaming on it for 2 years, and I've listened to her dream out loud, and I'm so proud of you for what you're accomplishing, Viola, because I think you're doing some really great things, and I know this group really appreciates what you're doing. So if you're liking this stuff, guys, share these conversations, share this information about this conference, because I wanted to bless you all. I'm already blessed by being a part of it, and seeing what is coming, what those speakers are going to talk about. You do not want to miss out on it.
That's right. That's right. Well, y'all have a good day. Have a good day, Melissa. I love you.
Love you. All right. Take care.